A New Language of Form, Suprematism, Constructivism, and Stijl, Chapter 15. This chapter covers three fascinating styles: Suprematism and Constructivism from Russia, and Stijl from the Netherlands. Let's take a look at the timeline. Suprematism lasted from 1913 to 27, Constructivism 1917 to 1934, and lastly Stijl 1917 to 1931. Russia was torn by World War I, then once again by the Russian Revolution when Tsar Nicholas was overthrown and executed along with his family. Russia plunged into civil war, and the Red Army of the Bolsheviks emerged the winner. During this political chaos, there was a brief creative explosion of art in Russia with international impact on graphic design. The Stijl movement is also covered with artists seeking universal laws of balance and harmony in art. Chapter 15 focuses on the movements in Russia and Holland that pushed Cubism to a pure geometric art and the formal approach to typographic design that emerged. In Russia, Suprematism and Constructivism were the origins, and key contributors included Kazimir Malevich, El Lissitzky, Alexander Rodchenko, Georgy and Vladimir Stenberg, and Gustav Klutzis. Many of the avant-garde artists were enthusiastic about the revolution, as it promised to open up new freedoms with the art world and to legitimize the new abstract forms of art. Shortly after the revolution, avant-garde artists became the new generation of artistic intellectuals teaching art in circles and at universities. However, this was not to last very long. Once the Civil War ended, along with the new economic policy, the structuring of society also restructured the art world, and Soviet realism emerged out of censorship and the desire for utilitarian art, such as architecture and product design. Suprematism was a new painting style that rejected pictorial content for pure geometric form and color. Suprematist art tried to rid painting of all associations with reality. They saw this as the only way art could free itself from a society that was morally bankrupt to achieve purity. Malevich believed in intuitive organization of basic forms and color. By 1920, after the Russian Revolution, a split of ideology happened between Suprematism, that we see on the left, and Constructivism on the right. Here we see the style characteristics of Suprematism. And this is important in that Suprematism has non-representational imagery. It looks a bit more like an abstract painting. Pure colors, basic geometric shapes. Lettering looks Soviet-influenced, and it often uses red and black on a beige-colored background. Now, not all pieces have lettering, but when they do, you'll see that Cyrillic quality. Russian artist Kazimir Malevich founded a new painting style called Suprematism that rejected pictorial content in favor of pure geometric form and color. Malevich believed the expressive qualities of a painting developed from the intuitive organization of elemental forms and colors. By 1920, following the Russian Revolution, a deep ideological split occurred between Russian artists such as Malevich and Kandinsky, who felt that art should remain an essentially spiritual activity apart from the utilitarian needs of society. So Malevich founded this painting style believing the essence of the art experience was the perceptual effect of color and form. He created a construction of concrete elements in color and shape. the visual form became the content, and expressive qualities developed from the intuitive organization of forms and colors. He argued that art should be a spiritual activity. The constructivist ideal was best realized by this painter, architect, graphic designer, and photographer, a visionary who profoundly influenced the course of graphic design. He developed a painting style that he called Prounds, that introduced three-dimensional illusions that both receded, negative depth, behind the picture plane and projected forward toward the picture plane. It was called Prounds and connected the modern painting concepts of form and space to applied design. His mastery of technology to serve communist society really transformed suprematist design elements into political symbolism for communication. So let's look at this piece, Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge. Notice here the symbolism. The Bolshevik army emblem, a red wedge, is slashing diagonally into a white sphere, signifying Kerensky's white forces. The slogan's 4 words are placed to reinforce the dynamic movement. We notice that this piece is abstracted, and it also has typography which shows that Cyrillic alphabet. Take a look at the positive and negative depth going on. For example, those gray rectangles that are stippled, dotted, they are going behind that black shape that is to the right. So that is negative depth. We also see some red triangles right below that. And notice those are going over top of those shapes, positive depth. This is part of Prounds. What's interesting is that it's the way that we work on computers in layers. Publications he contributed to included Mertz, at which he collaborated with Kurt Schwitters on the design and editing of a special double issue, Broom, a radical American magazine for which he designed covers, title pages, and other graphics. He also worked on the trilingual Russian journal Vesh, which he worked on with the editor Ilya Ehrenberg. Here's a cover for The Voice by Mayakovsky in 1923. In contrast to the Vesh cover constructed on a diagonal axis, here we see a right rigid angle that is animated by the counterbalance of the M and the circles. Pages for The Voice. The poem written by Mayakovsky, Our March, begins with the text, "Beat your drums on the squares of the riots, turn red with the blood of the revolution." The title type has staccato cadences of a drum beat. The red square signifies the blood-stained town squares. Notice the really nice tabs all along the right side of the book. Here we see another page for The Voice. This is the poem Order for the Army of the Arts, which appears on the right page opposite a dynamic constructivist design. The Isms of Art, 1914 to 1924, which Lissitzky edited with Jean Arp, was one of the most influential book designs of the 1920s because it represented an important step toward the creation of a visual program for organizing information based on a grid. His treatment of sans serif type and bold rules were an early expression of the modernist aesthetic. Lissitzky also effectively used montage and photomontage for complex communications messages. Here we see a lot of complex type information organized into a cohesive whole by the construction of structural relationships. Here's a title page from the Isms of Art. The graphic spirit achieved by medium weight sans serif type, that mathematical division of space, white areas, and bold rules established a typographic standard for the modern movement. It's a really stark, powerful image that shows the youth of a collective society cloned into an almost frightening anonymous double portrait above the exhibition structure designed by Lissitzky. Let's take a look now at Constructivism. You'll notice that it shares some of the style qualities with Suprematism, including the lettering looking Soviet-influenced and often uses red and black on a beige-colored background. But we add to it geometric shapes, asymmetry, in other words, not divided in the middle and even on both sides, but asymmetrical, and diagonal lines. Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko were referred to as constructivists, and they devoted themselves to serving the new communist society through industrial design, visual communications, and applied arts. Rodchenko led the constructivist movement along with Tatlin, and they renounced art for art's sake. They wanted to devote themselves to industrial design, visual communication, and applied arts serving the new communist society. So they forsook painting for graphic design and photojournalism. This was a period when design was held in higher esteem than, say, painting. And in 1923, he began a design magazine for all fields of the creative arts entitled Novia Left, which translates to the left front of the arts. He developed also the concept of serial painting. In this portrait of Rodchenko, which I love, you see the Novia Left logo reflected in his glasses. And on the right, a theater poster, Kino Glatz. Here's a very famous piece created by Rodchenko. And again, he created works that promoted Soviet ideology. But his works can't be reduced to simple propaganda. He created very iconic posters for the Leningrad Publishing House, and it's widely recognized as having been co-opted by many movements of lesser political intent in the 1920s. He used powerful juxtapositions of visual elements and a call for literacy as well. In this widely imitated piece, we see a female figure, so we have recognizable objects which distinguish it from the abstractions we saw in Suprematism. Again, shouting out with this Cyrillic alphabet that help us to easily identify this style as constructivism. Here's a detail of the film Cine Eye, and I love the close cropping of the eye. It really captures your attention. Another piece that involved advertising. Rodchenko created works that were visually striking regardless of what they were trying to sell. In this case, he was selling pacifiers for children. This is the work of Georgy and Vladimir Stenberg. We see a spatial dislocation that is achieved by extreme perspective, this circular type, and the fragmented figure. The De Stijl movement was launched in the Netherlands in the summer of 1917 by its founder and guiding spirit, Theo van Doesburg. De Stijl's philosophy and visual forms developed from the pure geometric abstraction in the paintings of Piet Mondrian, who was influenced by the Cubist painting and the philosopher Schoenmaker. Schoenmaker defined the horizontal and vertical as the two fundamental opposites shaping our world, and called red, yellow, and blue the three principal colors. The visual vocabulary of De Stijl artists was reduced to red, yellow, blue, black, gray, and white, straight horizontal and vertical lines, and flat rectangular or square planes. Deeply concerned about the spiritual and intellectual climate of their time, and through this prescribed vocabulary, they sought a pure expression of universal harmony through mathematical structure. Here we see the style characteristics of de Stijl. Again, asymmetry, these primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, with neutrals, black, white, and gray, and the perpendicular lines. This is a very easy style to identify on the test. I wanted to show you, before we get started, this wonderful cartoon by one of my favorite illustrators, Grant Snyder. In it, he's showcasing what makes de Stijl so fun and fascinating. It's from the Who Needs Art series. And take a look at the text, and I think you will get a sense of the style which he so cleverly showcases in this comic. De Stijl principles in graphic design spread the movement's theory and philosophy through the journal De Stijl, which Van Doesburg edited and published from 1917 till he died in 1931. Van Doesburg's design of alphabets and posters, curved lines were eliminated, and sans serif typefaces were favored. Cover designs by Lissitzky and Hutzar were included, and De Stijl architectural theory was also realized by Gerrit Rietveld's design of the Schroeder House in Utrecht. In 1922, Van Doesburg convened an international congress of constructivists and Dadaists in Weimar, Germany, which L. Lissitzky attended. In Poland, the designer Henryk Berloui was decisively influenced by Lissitzky's Warsaw lectures, and he opened an advertising firm in Warsaw with two futurist poets. There they introduced constructivism into Polish graphic design. In Czechoslovakia, Ladislav Sutnar advocated the constructivist ideal and the application of design principles to every aspect of contemporary life. His book jackets and editorial designs were characterized by an organizational simplicity and type clarity that gave graphic impact to communication. So this was an incredibly popular movement that spread to many different countries. Here we see Theo van Doesburg, the founder and guiding spirit again of de Stijl. Like Piet Mondrian, he reduced his visual vocabulary to those primary colors and the neutrals, the straight horizontal and vertical lines, and flat planes limited to rectangles and squares. He also applied de Stijl principles to architecture, sculpture, and typography while editing and publishing that journal, De Stijl. Here we see a cover for De Stijl in 1922. The type is asymmetrically balanced, so it's not centered, and it's not easy to create asymmetrical balance. In the four corners of an implied rectangle, De Stijl is combined with the letters N and B, which indicated new images. And here we see Piet Mondrian's work. He was a painter who worked during the De Stijl movement. Like Van Doesburg, he also used primary colors and neutrals, straight horizontal and vertical lines, and flat planes. He stopped contributing articles to this De Stijl journal in 1924 after Van Doesburg developed his theory of elementarism. But here we see a beautiful example of a Mondrian piece. You'll find many Mondrian works in galleries and in museums. And here we see that beautiful combination of those horizontal and vertical lines and those primary colors. Whenever I look at Piet Mondrian's work, I see its great potential in graphic design, like this piece, Broadway Boogie Woogie. I just think it would be a beautiful scarf too, don't you, for fashion? Well, you'll find out that poor Piet Mondrian is one of the most ripped off artists in history when it comes to the design of objects. Here's his composition number 10, and Tableau 1. Now, when you see these pieces in a museum, you notice what an incredible job he did painting these lines and getting that extremely flat color that he achieved. They're really quite remarkable to look at. And this movement went beyond the flat graphic material or paintings. Here we see a chair, the red and blue chair, designed by Rietveld. It represents one of the first explorations of the Stijl art movement into 3-dimension. And I've actually seen this chair in the Louvre, and it's absolutely striking. Built in 1924 by Gerrit Rietveld for Miss Schrader and her 3 children, this house was designed preferably without walls. They espoused progressive ideals that included a fierce commitment to a new openness about relationships with their families and to truth in their emotional lives. This house is one of the best known examples of De Stijl architecture and arguably the only true De Stijl building. It's interesting that you can see many great examples of De Stijl-inspired architecture in San Diego. Here we see a cover design for De Stijl where he designed the magazine's logos with letters constructed from an open grid of squares and rectangles. It says De Stijl right in it. Hussar combined his composition with type and Van Doesburg's logo to create a concise rectangle in the center of the page. Now here we see some of those examples I told you about how this movement traveled to other countries. I love the layout of the typography and these rules. Seems like this would be a beautiful business card, but it's actually a brochure about chocolate. A piece by Sutnar for minimum housing, created in 1931. And again, that wonderful use of the rectangle and the grid lines really brings a lot of order and interest to the piece. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was a De Stijl artist who turned to non-representational painting. He was influenced by Kazimir Malevich, and here I wanted to show you his photo and motion experiments. He will go on to teach at the Bauhaus and influence many young designers. His design for an avant-garde publication, I-10, and it's really one of the purest examples of De Stijl principles applied to typography. It demonstrates the collaboration of Constructivism, De Stijl, and Merz all together. Do these styles influence modern communications today? Have a look at these 2 pieces by the street artist Shepard Fairey. On the left, we see a poster for Saks Fifth Avenue. And then on the right, we see a campaign clearly inspired by Alexander Rodchenko. It's a bold graphic design with that propaganda spirit of constructivist art. Growing up, my father worked for United Airlines, and I'll never forget the stewardess costumes that you see in the middle. They were Mondrian-inspired uniforms. On the left, we see a dress, and on the right, an even more contemporary bathing suit. Poor Piet Mondrian, again, he's one of the most ripped-off artists of all time. Even Nike has appropriated his color schemes and spatial division. And here we see IKEA's furniture and products, again, using that same aesthetic. How about skateboards? And here we see tattoos.